The project leader for the Hull dig site was John Bouglass. He was responsible for recording every detail of the excavation.
We're fortunate with this site, the preservation conditions are excellent. We have surviving coffins, textile fragments, leather objects. We have bodies that still got shoes on and things like that. So we have really good skeletons to look at. We have the complete ground plan for a medieval monastery, which is almost unheard of. It's a major piece of archaeological work.
The buildings belonged to a Christian order called the Augustinian Friars. And the cloisters, living accommodations, and church were collectively known as the Friary. The Augustinian Friary was one of the first to be established in England, but it was destroyed in 1539. Unlike some other religious orders of the time, the brothers who lived there were not rich. They had to work for a living. They were the social servants of their day. They looked after the poor in the town. They were skilled in medicine and cared for both the rich and the poor who fell ill. And they had taken vows of celibacy. The friars' good work and religious dedication put them in high standing in the town. As the archaeologists continued to excavate the site, they were overwhelmed by the number of skeletons they found. Many showed signs of disease, as would be expected in a place that cared for the ill. But there were a few bodies in particular that shocked Charlotte Roberts, who had been assigned to the dig as the expert on ancient disease.
Very soon after we got skeletons, we started to see things that were rather unusual. And particularly, there was a lot of infectious disease in the site, including what we thought were classic cases of syphilis. And this one here, 1216, this 25 to 35-year-old male is one good example. In fact, it's the best example.
All the bodies from the Hull site, including skeleton 1216, were sent for further analysis. Most diseases do not leave traces in bones, making diagnosis so long after death nearly impossible. But syphilis is one of the few exceptions.
There are a number of changes in the skeleton for recognizing syphilis. If we focus on the skull, you can see immediately that there's something wrong. Normally, and if I just get a skull that's not affected by the disease, you would expect to see a smooth surface on this part of the skull. But here, you've got pockmarked lesions, holes in the bone. It's something that people call caries sicca. It's characteristic of venereal syphilis. You don't see it in any of the other syndromes. So I would say that's characteristic of the disease. The other thing on this skull is that you've got a hole in the palate, the connection between the nose and the mouth, and that's commonly seen in syphilis. If we move down the skeleton, what we see again is bone formation and bone destruction. I think probably the most florid bone formation is actually on the leg bones. This is the thigh bone, and you can see the whole length of it has got the formation of bone. We've also got some destructive lesions here and here. If we look at one of the lower leg bones, again you're seeing the same sort of changes that you see here. But also you get a massive amount of bone formation on the front of this lower leg bone, which people call a sabre shin because it looks like a sabre. Imagine the inflammation, the swelling of these limbs, the redness, the heat, the pain.
Apart from skeleton 1216, the site contained other bodies that seemed to have the disease. In all, there were at least some characteristic signs of syphilis in more than 60% of the bodies. But how had these syphilitic remains come to lie within the friary walls? It was clear that the friars sold burial plots, but it still seemed strange that a person with such a taboo disease would have been buried within the sanctuary of this deeply religious community.
Suppose she could have left 3. No, is that the female burial?
To look for an explanation,
This one, yeah.
experts at Bradford University created a computerized map. Plotting the site of each skeleton superimposed over the outline of the friary. What they found seemed logical. The nearer the altar, the more prestigious and expensive the plot. The most exalted plots were reserved for the senior friars and for rich merchants who paid heavily for the privilege. The surprise was where the syphilitic skeleton was found. In a prime spot close to the altar. So the body belonged either to a senior friar, which seemed unlikely because of the celibacy vows, or to a wealthy nobleman who had paid for the plot. But even more important to the larger syphilis story than who he was exactly when this man had died. The archaeological evidence from the dig suggested that the man had probably been buried in the 1300s. But if this was correct, it was electrifying information, for it placed the syphilitic body in the Old World long before Columbus ever set sail for the Americas. A positive date from Hull before 1492 would mean the history of syphilis would require rewriting. A rare discovery at the Hull site offered a clue to the burial date. The waterlogged conditions had preserved some of the original wooden coffins, ideal material to examine for age.
It's a very unusual find. There are only 10 sites that have generated significant quantities of waterlogged coffin boards across the whole country for the last 50 years. So it's a very unusual find. And this is by far the biggest assemblage.
Dendrochronologist Ian Tyers took more than 300 samples back to his lab for analysis.
The critical thing that we were supposed to be sorting out was the dating of the coffins themselves to help sort the stratigraphy and help put a timetable to the burials. You can see that we have wide rings and narrow rings are effectively reflecting the conditions under which the tree was growing, whether it was having a good summer or a bad summer as far as growth is concerned. And those act like a fingerprint through time. The pattern of narrow and wide rings is unique over a number of millennia.
Having recorded the measurements for each sample, Tyers fed all the information into a central database. Then, he looked for matches that would give him a definite date for the wood.
From our dating perspective, we can date the year and indeed the season of the year that the trees are felled. And those that we have bark edge for, so that the year the trees were cut down, are all in the 1340s and the 1360s.
The results from the dendrochronology lab placed the coffin wood between 1340 and 1369. This was not in itself particularly unexpected. the evidence from the dig, the pottery, the historical records, also indicated a date around the middle of the 14th century. For George Armelagos, the hull finds were interesting but not yet conclusive. He was intrigued by the date from the wood, but wanted more definite proof of the body's age before he would consider discarding the traditional Columbus theory.
Really, the debate centers around this issue. What is the evidence in the old world prior to contact? Now, it may be at Hull, there is the irrefutable evidence. If they find, for example, that you have a radiocarbon date that dates it before 1492, then I would have to do some explaining.
The dendrochronology had given the age of some coffin wood from the friary, but not all the coffins remained intact, and there was no way to prove from the wood that skeleton 1216 had definitely died at the same time. For Armelagos, proof would only come from the body itself. He wanted the bones to be carbon dated, and Roberts agreed. She knew that if her find was to be taken seriously, it would have to stand up to intense